Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Primary Sources and Teaching Online webinar series brought to you by the TPS Western Region in partnership with the TPS Teachers Network. And now on to part 2 of photography and primary sources.
Okay. And we're back. So another thing that first I also wanted to talk about that photography has a language, and photography is also a habit of mind in the way that I think about it. The way that you work with your students on primary sources, and you want them to just always be in the habit of mind of who is this, who's the author, what's the background, what are the sources. Those are things that they should be thinking about automatically. And it's the same thing with some of the language of photography. And so like many medium or genres, there are devices, there are techniques that you can use to bring attention to something. So for example, one is lighting. And so lighting can change emotion or meaning. And this is another one. This was, again, you can tell by the pomegranates, it was in the Jerusalem market. But when I saw that lighting, I really did stop in my tracks. I joke with someone who went on the tour with us that I nearly knocked him over to get it. But when I saw the intensity of the colors and then the lighting falling like that, I wanted to get it. And so photography, it's a habit of mind, and you can either do it intentionally. So for example, in photography, there's something called the golden hour, and that's shortly before sunrise or shortly before sunset. And so you all know when you get that nice, beautiful orange sky, and the lighting is very soft and more red and yellow, and most of the blue is gone. That's what's called the golden hour. So you can set up your photography to wait for that. It really isn't a golden hour. It's really like a golden 15 minutes. It doesn't last long, but it's when the sun is in that particular position. Oh, my neighbor is mowing their lawn. Sorry, I'll shut the door here in a second. But anyway, so photography is a habit of mind. And so the other thing I was going to say is that at when you go for that golden hour, should you want to, that's when the blue light gets filtered out and you get warmer light. And so that's a STEM thing, maybe. And of course, then lighting again. So this is the same image, but at just a 15-minute interval. And so you just see that the difference of the emotion and what you're doing. Hold on.
Welcome to a Zoom meeting, right?
Right. I was saying how this happened to me the other day too.
It's all good. So, and I think lighting is one of the most special things that can happen in the photographs too. And sometimes it's luck, and sometimes it's really determined effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's either one. And by the way, this is doing webinars in pandemic. You don't control anything.
The lawnmower.
The lawnmower, the kids, you don't control any of that. Okay, so just to look at the difference in lighting. Another thing is texture or going in close. And so you look at the pieces. So think about this again with primary sources, or you can think about this in a writing sense, that when you're really trying to detail what a room looks like, this is similar in terms of going in very close. What are the pieces? What's the context? What to include? And then again, along primary sources line, but what's included in the frame, but what's outside this frame? And how choosing that framing and choosing that the lighting and and going in close, how that changes perception and what people think about it. And then of course, color. So color is beautiful, but color also has a language to it. And one of the things I think about with color in students is asking them maybe to go find the color of anger, go find the color of love, find the color of calm. And we may think that those anger is red and love is yellow and calm is blue, but they may not. And so, just that to really tune into what is the language of color. And this one too, this is one that I took in Ireland. But one of the things, this is a processed image, because first I really felt the sense of the lonely boat, the well-used lonely boat, waiting for the tide to come back in so it could go do its job. But the other thing is that I also amped up the saturation in the greens, because the thing that I found so interesting is what low tide revealed that, you know, obviously you don't see. And again, you know, think about how you might connect that. Then there's also the emotion. This was during the student walkout for gun violence a year or so ago. And so, you know, looking for, so what's the emotion of the moment? Same thing, this was the March for Our Lives.
Mm-hmm.
And then also thinking about photography with symbolism and what does it mean? This is a outpost on the Western Irish coast. During World War II, it was actually the lookout for ships. But the symbolism of isolation or aloneness. And these two, the one on the left, the Statue of Liberty, I was staying in a hotel in New York City, and they had a telescope in the room to see the Statue of Liberty. So I took a photo through the telescope, which I thought was way more symbolic to me than just regular old Statue of Liberty, which we've always seen. And the one on the right, the same thing, that because I work with the Library of Congress, I'm there on an occasional basis, and I was walking around the Capitol, and this showed up, the light coming through the fallish turning leaves and the shadows, and then just the freedom of statue of, it's a Statue of Freedom on top of the Capitol. And I just felt it was a hopeful, symbolic image of our country. Okay, so Laura and Michelle, teaching ideas.
So Mary mentioned in the chat that all of these things can be really used for writing, and actually that's a way we approached it in the classroom, and we'd like to share that a little bit with you right now. I'm going to start with a Chinatown sensory activity we did. This actually came out of a conversation looking for primary sources in the same area of New York then and now. And my students were studying history, American as normal, and we were talking about primary sources. They do an entry activity every day into the classroom, and our real goal here was to step away from just what they were seeing, but to think with the senses, to think about what they would be hearing, what they would be smelling, what they'd be tasting, all those sensory pieces. Sometimes that comes out in the Library of Congress activity, and the protocol was see, reflect, and wonder. But here I wanted to make it more purposeful, to really have the kids dig in depth. So Peggy, could you go on to the next slide? We'll take a look at that historical photo. So we actually did some analysis around the historical photo that is, oh, you didn't have to click it, you just go forward. The historical photo that was right there was taken in turn of the century New York at a town that is called, well, it is Chinatown, but it's also the center of where the Gangs of New York took place, the movie itself. And in addition to that, there's all kinds of different stories that surround the neighborhood there. It is at a cross section of Little Italy, what the very old Little Italy. It's right where Chinatown, Little Italy, and the Lower East Side all meet together. And so my students were familiar with this because of some of the stories that we were reading, but we took a look at this image and then went through and said, all right, now describe it using your senses. They created a word cloud and a list of words that they could use, and you can see some of the things that stuck out to them. Crowded, dirty. They imagined that there would be yelling on the streets. I asked about that specific one because if you know the really analytics behind creating a word cloud, the larger words are things that are mentioned more. And so we were doing this as a brainstorming activity as a large group in the classroom. And they said, well, there's no microphones and there would be horses and people walking. And if you were selling something, you'd be yelling at people as they were walking down the street. Today, trust me, you still get the same thing. If you're in Chinatown on a Saturday morning and you're walking around the corner at Moscow Street or Mulberry Street, they're still going to be yelling there. Peggy, can you go on to the next picture? The next one, then we took a contemporary photo and we asked them to look at the contemporary piece. And with that contemporary piece, this is the same area. It's the same street. This is Mulberry Street again. Not quite the same time of year, but we had kids take a look at this. And some of the different things that came out, these are two different classes. I wanted you to see some of the different words they were using. Some of the same terms came out from the older photo, but we started seeing here dim, red, bright light. Some of those things didn't come out in the black and white photo. And of course, that's because this is colorized, right? But some of them remain the same, loud. Although the loud part here is the cars and the engines and the honking, not necessarily the wagon clomping of the feet of the horses or anything like that. So I might suggest that when you're looking at analyzing primary sources, make sure that you're thinking about what you really want the kids to dig down deep into. And a lot of the different pieces that Peggy talked about in regards to photography layer right into primary source analysis. And those elements then transfer into really good reflective writing. So Peggy, do you want to go on? Oh, we can't hear you.
I was muted. I muted myself.
You got it.
Another thing that I think about are photographic themes. So in the when I was in Ireland, I noticed that often, a lot in Ireland, they really decorate their windows on the outside so that when you're looking at them, whatever they're trying to say is some kind of message about who lives in that house. And that's when I decided that I was going to try to photograph different types of windows and have kind of a window theme collection or something like that. And so when you look on the left, you know, with one kind of plot or flower pot on the right, a different kind of flower pot, and then in the one in the center, and just what that might say. On the left, that was again in Jerusalem. The one in the middle is Aspen, and the one on the right is Ireland. So when I thought about the theme, I thought, well, you could certainly think about writing about, so who's behind these windows? What makes a person put fluffy pillows? Or what on the one on the left with the one from Jerusalem, it's rusted. So why don't you care about what your window looks like and what's behind it? And the same thing with the windows from Ireland, that they very much wanted to deliver an external message to who lives in this house. So that's the idea behind photographing a theme, and then some teaching ideas for how you might use
so that. Peggy's not the only one that travels this way. I travel with windows and doors. So I'm an architect. I've got that background with it. My undergrad, I had a minor in architecture and historic preservation. And so I really look at architecture and planning and what a city means. And I'm intrigued by the windows. I'm intrigued by the materials. I'm intrigued by the structure. My poor husband has now been trained into doing this when we travel. He knows he may not take a highway. He must go down a main street, although I very happily know now that he looks for ghost signs and windows with me and doors. So the windows that Peggy was showing you were in a couple different places. I will say that these are specifically from Ireland and Scotland. So we went to Scotland and spent some time in the Highlands region. And when I travel, I take a lot of doors and windows for a myriad of different reasons, and I use them in the classroom. And we really use this to bring a different perspective to students. And so in this one, I wanted to share really quickly about how we did an activity with kiddos. And so a lot of times I want to talk about just really quickly the architecture piece. Doors in Europe are very different. Here in the States, you may see a double door, you may see a door knocker. Very common in Italy. You will see very large doorknobs in the center of a door low. In Ireland or Scotland, you may see a very plain door, although some of them are decorated with wreaths, the plants. And then take a look at that picture up at the right. Here's a plant that's a cat that's decorated right outside of a regular door. I know that door happens to be 4 doors down from the Scottish minister's house, who was administering the city of Dunblane when we were there. And that's what the little placard is on his door. And then think about the windows. We have lots of different windows here in the United States, but older windows, wood pane windows, stone windows, arched windows, squared windows, they all have a different perspective. And so a lot of times when you're taking a photograph, think about what's on the other side, but also what how it breaks up your vision of the picture. So then we said, okay, how are we going to use this with kiddos? We want them to tell a story. What does it mean to know what's behind the door or what's behind the window? What's the story of that? A lot of that comes to the fact that many of our important places are not just significant for their architecture, but are really significant because of the event or the person or what took place there. Peggy, would you mind clicking on the link that says sharing a product? Whoops, I'm sorry. That's going to take you out. And I wanted to just share this really quickly with you, just to show you this is an activity that is shared with you. And it asks students to actually take the piece that you may choose a door or you may choose a window, but you can create on the back side a 2-voice poem, a spark presentation, or an essay, which then illuminates the story. And the key here is to tie it to the research you've done with primary sources, the significance of the place, or maybe just a creative story that you've imagined based on what you've read in a series of books. And so this activity asks the student to look at that window or door and imagine what's on the other side of it. So we wanted to share that activity just so you've got a basis and maybe a thought process of taking a special window or a door, and or for that matter, a gate. One of my kids said, you know, I'm really not interested in doors, but I am interested in gates because I can tell you all about my goats. And I was like, well, if you can tell me all about your goats, then I will give you permission to write about your goats. Use the gate. So he actually had to go get a picture of his gate and talked about the story of how his animals on his farm helped support his family, but also were generationally supported by his great-grandparents here in Colorado. So Peggy, I'm going to turn it back over to you so you can talk some more photo.
Okay. But the other thing that I was thinking about with photography, Elizabeth James did a webinar for us I think last week or the week before. And she was talking about, especially at this time, trying to capture how kids feel. And they could do a reflection with I feel this or that and write it. But she was talking about using maybe an emoji. I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel anxious. And I thought about the same thing with photography, that to let photography be your reflection about your learning, a reflection about how things are going in your life, anything. And so I thought about photography and reflection. And then I also, as we said, the writing prompt. So I will say that this photo is by my daughter, so the apple doesn't fall far. But she and her son went out to take this photo, a lake near their house. So they took the photo together. And she was saying that prior to this, she was having a very hard time getting him to write. And once that was their photo and they took it together, he was able to write his story about the blue heron. And when we talked about, I guess to kind of wrap it around in the beginning, that photography is a way of bringing them into the inquiry cycle. They're either creating the photography through rephotography, they're either using the language of photography to express emotions or thoughts or feelings, or when I talked about the story in Israel, and the same here, that they're a writing prompt and there's ownership in them. I took that photo, it's not someone else's photo. So there's a thought. So now back to teaching ideas. Okay, Michelle or Laura,
So
whichever.
we came across, yeah, we're going to talk about this a little bit. We came across an opportunity with History Colorado. We mentioned it in a prior webinar just briefly, but we wanted to share this with you because it's powerful right now. This is actually a living document. I selected some examples from my students, but I wanted to let you know that History Colorado has an effort right now, as does Montana, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Most of your historical societies are collecting stories around COVID. And they really want to document and create a repository of primary sources and work that documents the history of what's happening in this experience. So the goal was to create a historical repository. It was an adult goal. The museum came out and said, hey, adults, you want to do this? We came back and said, hey, what about the kids? And they said, well, they could fill it out. We said, well, we want to do it a little bit different way. And so we said, okay, we're going to do this our way. We partnered with the museum and we tagged up with their memory project. And so we're working with what we call the Museum of Memory. And we are working specifically to document this over a series of 6 to 8 weeks through photographs and through writing. And we have created a couple links here for you that can guide you to some of the prompts that we've used. In fact, the writing and action prompts there will do that. But Peggy, can you click to the next one for me? That would be great. So this is what the start was for the students, and this was our classroom activity. Peggy, would you mind clicking on this? I think it's linked if I'm correct. And it's gonna go right out to an example piece that ties that photograph. So remember when we were talking about, it is view only, so we'll just leave it, it's fine. Remember when we were talking about photos, we were saying looking out a window or in a window, looking out a door or in a door. Peggy, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down just a tad, that would be great. I put in some examples from our kiddos that actually talk about this, that talk about their experience with COVID. And it isn't absolutely perfect. This one is a really interesting one, Richard. Richard doesn't say too much in class. He's pretty quiet. He's got to be the cool man on the street, wicked happy to be a history guy, although he won't admit it to anybody at his table, but he has this huge, deep repository of knowledge in the back of his brain. And he's always the first one out on a primary source when you ask them, what do they think they know about it? I didn't know that Richard lived in a more of a rural community or farming area of our town. He does, but this one was interesting to read. I want to go outside. I want to go places. I want to do the things that I dream of, not just wish for what will happen in the future. I want the now to be free, not boxed in my 4 walls. So they had to write about it and then put 6 words at the end. Stay safe, wash your hands thoroughly. Could you go to another one for me, Peggy? Would you mind? Just choose one, doesn't matter. So this is Lucinda, and here where he has said things have traditionally changed a lot for him, Lucinda's like, well, nothing's really changed on the landscape, but it rained. And then she goes on to talk a little bit that emotionally her world's in turmoil. And she's a huge extrovert. And so not being able to go out to dinner, see her family or travel, it's hard for her. She's struggling with that, as with many of us, I would suppose. And her words are stay creative, stay positive, and be aware. So these are just some. Choose another one, Peggy, one more. Here's Taryn. This is interesting. Taryn, this is out of Taryn's front porch, I believe. And he said a lot of people live in his neighborhood and it's been louder because there's more people and there are more, there's more visibility in his neighborhood. But this one's interesting, full of life despite current situation. So I think sometimes the photo matches the writing and then those 6 words, that powerful statement ties it all together. And we've had them use the photos for this in lots of different ways. So the assignment itself, I know there's a question in the chat box about that. The assignment itself was over a period of 7 weeks, they are to document their history. And each week they get a different assignment. Peggy, would you mind scrolling up just a tad to the top? Because on that, it'll show it to you. We've given you this. It gives you some instructions. Peggy, if you can go down to slide number 4, that would be Rockstar. This week was a little bit different. It says looking to the outside. It gives them explicitly what they need to do and a writing prompt to think about. And every week it changes a bit. It changes as maybe just a statement, maybe they're reflecting with their family, maybe they're reflecting on just their personal experience. All of this will be downloaded and sent digitally and in print to History Colorado and shared and put in the permanent archives. It will be in the museum forever. And the kids will be celebrating this in the fall. We'll come back to actually do some type of digital exhibit. We hope. We don't know how this is going to work yet. It's a brainstorming process and we're continuing to move forward with it. So Peggy, I'm going to turn it back over to you to the presentation because we're wrapping up towards our time.
We are. Michelle, I was just going to say that your activity there actually made me kind of cry. I mean, it was not cry, but feel really emotion with those kids and their words and how they feel. Yeah. Very powerful, very powerful.
Yeah, I'm going to have a really hard time. I need to be honest. So I've been reading a lot of these. There's some coming out of DC. I've been reading the medical community a lot. I'm a paramedic as well as a teacher. So I read the medical perspective of it. And there's a lot that are doing stories of what it is behind the lines in New York right now, in Los Angeles, in some of our other areas. I know that there's lots of them. They're all over the place. And then I come back to my kids and I read what their lives are, how things have changed. Laura can speak to this because she's got a senior that's graduating. And, you know, it's exceptionally hard to see these life moments be stalled for these kids. And sometimes people are saying they are stalled. I believe that they're reinvented, they're reimagined, and we celebrate them in a different way. I mean, I'll let Laura talk because we can answer some questions now, but one of the biggest things, you had a senior in college and a senior in high school same year, right? You had to reinvent that whole piece. And, you know, Peggy, I looked at the pictures of Laura's daughter and of several of my other seniors who are graduating from college that I've taught. And it's been not only heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's been beautiful to see how we document what's happening now, but we still as Americans remain alive and remain moving forward, I guess. So Laura, do you want to say anything about that?
It's funny because I think it ended up, we've had a lot of graduations in the last few years. Like, it seems like 1 or 2 a year. And we think maybe this might have been our favorite. We pulled off a graduation ceremony for Rachel just as a family. My husband was the keynote speaker, and he gave advice around from rock song lyrics, and we sang the fight song from Utah State, and we had Rachel walk across the sidewalk and get her diploma, and we all cheered, and then we played Kahoot, a graduation Kahoot for Rachel in her life. But I do think we reinvented it, but we came together as a family and in a way that we wouldn't have before. You know, we would have just attended and it would have been pictures, but not in the same way. So I think this whole reinvention, it's also moving over into education. It's interesting with the move to remote learning. We've talked about this a few times, that 21st century learning is finally here, and people are really pushed to embrace that and redefine and really figure out, how do I utilize this instructional tool in a meaningful way with my students and really transform teaching and learning, and what will that look like? So all of those things come to this kind of an activity with COVID-19 and as we reinvent ourselves. Do you have any does History Colorado have any idea of how many people are participating in this project, or?
Hundreds. I would guess now thousands, and I know we're right at the top of the hour. Those numbers keep increasing. You can too participate in that project. It's linked in our presentation, so you can go to it, and it is at History Colorado. And I would suggest, there's a couple of you that are doing this. Feel free to get in touch with us. I would be happy to connect you to the museum to make sure that your student work is also archived as well. So,
Keith, before we stop, any questions that we can answer in a minute or two?
There's a lot of sharing of resources and thank yous going around. So thanks
Great.
to all of you for what you shared with us this afternoon. I think I'll go ahead and wrap it up. If you have any questions, go ahead and add them to the chat and we can hang on afterwards to answer or have conversations if we need to. But I would like to thank Peggy, Laura, and Michelle for sharing all that amazing information this afternoon. I'd also like to thank Kyle and Crystal in the chat room for keeping an eye on that. And of course, the Library of Congress for making these webinars possible through the TPS program. As a reminder, for all of you who would like a professional development certificate for your participation today, that link is up there, that bit.ly/PS Teaching Online. Go there, fill out a quick reflection, and let us know where to send that certificate, and we'll get that back to you as soon as we can. Also like to remind you that we've been doing this series now for many, many weeks, and all those videos are archived and put up on the TPS Teachers Network at the link which Kyle's putting in there, but it's bit.ly TPS Teachers Network webinar album. And that's all up there for you to look at. Other than that, we are at the top of the hour again, so I will thank you all for attending, and have a pleasant evening.
Yeah, and thank you all. I appreciate everyone who came.